Hey everybody, Andy Duffy here, pastor of Antioch Church of the Brethren. I'm upstairs with Pastor Bilbo, right bud? And it's almost 1 a.m. And you might be wondering why am I awake at 1 a.m.? Well, I'm making a devotional. And Courtney and I were up pretty late playing some board games, and got a little intense. And well, I'm also reminded it also fits in with where we are in our telling the story of Jesus uh, as as he progresses toward the cross and the first Easter. This last week we've been working on. Jesus has been through so much. It is 12:52. I am tired from playing board games. That Friday for Jesus, he had been through the Last Supper. He'd been up all day already, talking with his disciples about really important things, really stressful, betrayal, predicting denials, trying to sort them out, trying to explain some really deep things. He went out to the garden, and he is praying hard and deep, and his disciples are letting him down. He's having this intense internal struggle. Luke says his sweat was like drops of blood. Some point in the night, Jesus is arrested. I'm already tired. I can't imagine how tired Jesus already is, and he hasn't even been arrested yet. Keeping that in mind, this is what Mark 14 says about Jesus' arrest. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. Bilbo, can you give me a kiss? He's not interested. He's too tired. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. This is Mark's version of the arrest of Jesus, and there are some remarkable differences between each gospel on this. In Mark, I'm certainly drawn to the kiss of betrayal. I'm drawn to the little moment of violence, right, when one of the disciples uses a sword to cut off an ear, and Jesus is like, whoa, what's going on? He doesn't rebuke the disciple, he rebukes the crowd, right? He just is like, hey, why'd you guys come out here to capture me like this, right? I was with you all the time, and he's kind of exposing the fact that they're doing this under cover of night, right? It's like, oh, you guys are trying to do something you don't want to be seen doing. And then we get that little bit at the end with the naked man running away, right? We don't know who the naked man was. It's kind of one of those mysteries, right? Well, in Matthew, things are a little bit different. It's a little more developed. In Matthew's account, Jesus replies to the kiss, saying, do what you came for, friend. Drawing attention to the fact that Judas was a friend of Jesus's. There's a speech that Jesus gives after one of his disciples cuts off the servant of the high priest's ear. Rather than giving the speech to the guards, he gives a speech to that disciple. He says, put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scripture be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? And then he goes on to address the crowd. So Matthew adds that moment where he rebukes the disciple. Don't pick up the sword. My way is not the way of violence, right? My way is not the way of even self-defense. That's not what this is about, right? I'm setting an example of a new way of doing things. And that's what we must be known for. And yet there's also a sense that Scripture is tied to this idea that the Messiah's followers have to be known as transgressors. So Luke actually draws attention before this passage that Jesus says, make sure you have a sword. And some of the disciples say, here we have 2 swords. And Jesus is like, okay, that's plenty, right? Like, what are 2 swords going to do to defend 12 guys from an angry mob? Not much. But it's to fulfill Scripture. In Luke's version, again, the disciples ask, Lord, should we strike with our swords, right? Because we have these 2 swords, remember we told you about? And Jesus is like, no more of that. And in Luke, Jesus actually heals the man whose ear is cut by a disciple. Right? So Luke even goes, Jesus is mending and healing his enemies, right? And he's saying, no, disciples, this isn't what we're about, again. And then John, and of course John's always a little bit different. John has no prayer of struggle in the garden, right? Jesus has already prayed for his disciples that they would withstand temptation and be protected by God. What happens in the garden is only the arrest in John. What it says here, and I'll read this for you. This is John 18, verse 2. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you I am he. If you are looking for me, let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put away your sword. Shall I not drink the cup my Father has given me?" There's a really interesting moment in John where the guards from the temple hear Jesus say, "I am he," and they like fall back, like there's some kind of force that's pushing them away. What is going on? And I wonder if that has to do with Jesus announcing himself using that language of God, "I am he," which recalls in the Exodus when God tells Moses what his name is, and he says, "I am that I am," or "I am who I am," or "I will be who I will be," right? God is self-defined. And here Jesus is saying, "I am he." There's divinity in what he's proclaiming. And the audience, the mob, they hear it and they're like, "Whoa!" They draw back a little bit, but just a little bit, right? We get a little bit more detail when you hear that it's actually Peter who has the sword and who is doing the striking. In this case, again, Jesus does not heal. That only happens in Luke. So, the interesting variations. The question for us, of course, now is, when we're tired, are we going to be able to behave as faithfully as Jesus is in all 4 of these Gospels? What would it take? I think more likely I would maybe respond like Peter or like the disciple who gets violent. And that's just the truth. And it's not the right truth. But when I'm tired and I get cranky, I get angry. But Jesus has already fought and he's surrendered to what must happen next. I'm going to go to bed. I look forward to hearing from all of you tomorrow. Feel free to comment when you see this. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about Jesus as he's arrested and some of the details of the story. May we go out, may we be rested, and may we be faithful in all of these situations that arise. Good night.